Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're talking about cloud storage as a service, some of the opportunities, some of the challenges involved with that. To discuss that, I'm joined by someone who's very close to the topic. With me is Alan Rubin, co-founder and CEO of ClearSky Data. Hello to you, Alan.
Hi there, nice to be here.
So, ClearSky Data, we should talk about cloud storage in general, but can you give us kind of the nutshell elevator pitch of what ClearSky Data does?
Sure. So we're a Boston-based company, and we've been working with medium and large enterprise customers for several years, and providing them with a fully managed service that really tackles some of the fundamental issues that they're dealing with hybrid IT and multi-cloud. And the area that we focus on is the entire life cycle of their data and handling data management, both in terms of very, very high performance primary storage that is at the edge, low latency, but with all of the data protection, compliance, security, availability that they need for enterprise workloads. And so we're handling that sort of end to end, kind of all the way across the environment that is now emerging, where compute could be anywhere. And we built that in, and we save them, 50 to 75% in terms of their costs, but we really simplify what is a very, very complicated problem.
If I get sort of a really clear idea of the sector you're working in, because I think about there's a company with a pretty good sized data center, and they might be using AWS for cloud storage or Azure or a few different cloud providers. Why would they need, if they're already contracting with a large cloud provider, why would they need ClearSky Data as an intermediary?
So it's so interesting to watch the evolution of this, and it's something I've personally been really involved in and excited about for 10 years now, as have you as well. So what we're seeing today is that a typical enterprise that is not just born in the cloud, never had a data center, but has a mix of more traditional and legacy infrastructure, as well as you point out, maybe multiple cloud providers, is dealing with this very extended and complex environment where they have things like VMware and databases, Oracle, SQL. They've got all these things sitting in more traditional data centers, which of course they're desperately trying to consolidate and get out of, but still buying more gear, making copies of the data, backing it up, having a disaster recovery site, all the things they used to do, even if they don't have as many as they used to. And now they have an environment that also includes data that some of their developers went to back in 2010, they started doing DevOps and running things, dev test in the cloud and Amazon. But of course, now there's really cool stuff going on with Azure, and some of them are also using Google because of all of the AI and machine learning capabilities that the service offers. Mm-hmm. So what you have is sort of this almost like an a la carte menu for the people who are in the business side of where things could be run and what needs to happen to support the business use cases. And you've got IT in the middle trying to handle and manage it. And what we're finding is that really nobody has sort of thought about the fact that what you want is not to just copy the data and have to move it around and deal with accessing it and pulling things back from the cloud, which is really expensive, and having copies of the infrastructure that you stood up in one place in multiple locations. That's crazy. It makes no sense at all, and it costs a fortune. What you actually want is you just want the data to be accessible wherever the compute is running. And so one of the things that ClearSky does that's unique is we've kind of built this, it's like an extended and distributed caching network that has a lot of intellectual property that we've built. It's a little bit along the idea of Akamai in terms of being at the edge, close to wherever the compute is sitting. That could be a data center, that could be a cell tower, that could be a GCP compute environment, it could be in EC2, it doesn't really matter to us. But always the idea is that it's not the customer's problem to have to deal and manage with all of the ongoing infrastructure problems and challenges across that environment. We've taken that as like a fully managed and SLA-based service, and the customer just has what they need when they need it.
Well, I guess is part of the issue there the fact that fiber networking has gotten cheaper than cloud storage? Is the cost there a factor of what goes on?
I'm glad you asked that, actually, which was good because we didn't plan for you to ask that, which is a great question.
I sometimes say things that are not planned, believe it or not.
It was like right off the top. Well, one of the hidden things that's true is how dramatically things are changing in the networking world because of this distributed environment. And one of the things that was like a founding thing for ClearSky when my co-founder Laz Vikiridis and I were talking about it several years ago was this idea that a need to be able to connect across physical distances but still deal with latency as a problem was something that nobody seemed to be dealing with. So what you see customers doing is they are running lines and they're starting to take advantage of much more modern types of approaches, not just AT&T and Verizon, but some of the more modern on-demand, more, API enabled types of services. But they're still kind of stuck with the fact that latency is a problem that is not going to be solved by them. And they also are dealing with the fact that they're not expert in that. Most enterprises they try to avoid dealing with carriers, right? And it's one of the
Right.
things ClearSky we've kind of built into the approach that we've taken, because we just think that you can't solve this problem without addressing last mile issues and the fact that the data that's sitting physically in a cloud somewhere far away may not be that great if your compute needs to be elsewhere or it needs to be distributed.
Well, and so there's hot data, warm data, cold data, and it's like that hot data. Obviously, you can't wait around for that. You need that quickly.
At sub-millisecond, hundreds of thousands of IOPS. This is what, if you would buy a really expensive set of storage and data management, stuff traditionally, you would have done that. And then of course it would have been really important. So you would have protected it and you would have backed it up and you would have had multiple copies and stuff. And the cloud does not make that go away, right? You just have to handle it across more environments now. And so what we're kind of saying, there's got to be a better and more simplified, efficient way to do it, but not if you keep trying to use the same old architectural models.
Right. So it's a world that offers a lot more opportunities. It's a faster world, but it's a more complicated world. I'm going to imagine there's some executives out there, some IT managers that are pulling their hair and going, there's so many options out here. How has something gotten so complicated?
Well, one of the pleasures of being an entrepreneur, especially because I focus on, IT related infrastructure things, is getting to meet with CIOs all the time and, doing that across many companies. And I have to say that this is as challenging and trying a time as I have seen for a lot of the heads of IT and CIOs, because, certainly the CIOs have shifted into much more of a business type of a role where they're really meant to sort of focus not just on how do I reduce all my costs down to as little as possible, but I'm supposed to help promote the digital transformation that the executives are trying to accomplish and the business units are trying to be agile and, able to roll things out much more, real time in this kind of a user-based environment, self-service, everything on demand.
Mm-hmm.
So that puts both incredible pressure, but it also at the same time requires cost reduction. And those are very hard things to do. So if you're paying for your data over and over and over again, and then standing up all these environments and getting, oh my God, $1 million a month in cloud bills or some sort of incredibly expensive multi-year enterprise
Right.
license, which is what we're
Right.
seeing, especially Azure customers trying to do, and the other
Yep.
cloud providers following suit. Really, that's kind of what you used to do before, right? When you were buying from IBM and, EMC and all those things. But in a way, the assumption is that this is all supposed to be cheaper. And so it's just a
Right.
tremendous amount of pressure in terms of the decision makers. And I think that their feeling is that some of the things they're really, really great at, but other things would be best to turn to an outsourced provider, someone who can act as a trusted advisor or provide services to them. So we're a small part of that ecosystem.
It does seem like in the earlier days of cloud was sold as it's going to be cheaper because you don't have to go out and buy these chunks of hardware and install it in your system. But as the years have rolled on and that idea of it's going to be cheaper, it's gotten exploded, so to speak. Now the thing is like, well, cloud may not be cheaper, but it's a much more versatile, a much more effective tool for you. You need it to be cost effective. So get ready to reach deep into your wallet for this new version of cloud.
Right. It's because I was, my previous company, CloudSwitch, was involved at the very beginning of enterprise adoption of cloud. There were a lot of really, really bad experiences that I saw as people tried it beyond just a little sandboxy thing and went into full production and we're cloud first and we're moving everything to the cloud. How many reInvents have you been at, where that was
Right.
hallelujah up on stage, right? And then,
Right.
People would come back and they would say, okay, first of all, the amount I'm spending here is egregious. And part of the reason it's egregious is because we're not using it efficiently. So there's a lot of optimization, but part of
Right.
it is some workloads are not suited and we tried to go whole hog and now we're bringing some back, or we're going to re-architect things so that some piece of it takes advantage of the cloud. Like people are doing a lot of backup and, data protection in the cloud, but still wondering about how much their primary stuff, if it needs to have some sort of a connectivity to the edge, or it's frankly just not worth re-architecting it, right? Sometimes there are applications that are not worth re-architecting to work in the cloud, but they're working, they're critical, et cetera. So you got all this variety that, someone in the IT role has to be able to manage. And I don't think I've yet found anybody who said, well, the cloud is just the answer to all my problems. I think what they feel is that it's dramatic and unbelievably a catalyst to their business, but they're also learning how many sort of like, this issue of pulling data back from the cloud and performance and latency challenges and stuff as well as cost has been a little shocking.
Mm-hmm. To be sure. So let's talk about the idea of edge computing. We've certainly touched on it. Companies need edge computing. It's beyond just the Internet of Things. It's edge computing. How does your company play a role in edge computing?
Well, it's like cloud, such an emerging term that, of course, it gets abused and everybody's talking about it as meaning a different thing.
Right.
So
it was also called fog computing, right? Sorry to interrupt, but is edge computing and fog computing. It's really the same thing, but like I think fog might have been Cisco's idea. Okay, yeah.
They're interrelated, and I think people are trying, as they often do, to relate to what they do in their current business and tying it to some new trends that are going on. But what I would say is, standing up a traditional set of infrastructure in a traditional data center is not edge computing, right? I mean, that's just buying gear. What is interesting is that the explosion of the ability to have more analytics happening with data that is now growing incredibly quickly, exponentially in some of the edge locations, in what used to kind of just be, I'll call them like dumb, like areas where it was collecting of information and then sharing it over to some sort of big hub, back in my PISA days, large enterprise data warehouses. That's gone, it's blown up. And there is an assumption too that what you don't want to be doing is gathering and keeping all of the data, because some of it is very time sensitive, where it's a security thing, or it's looking at network operations, like the way Splunk does, or some of the machine learning where there's a desire to do some processing that sits at the kind of the endpoint where something physically is being monitored or measured or tracked. And then some of the data wants to be aggregated, and some of it wants to be stored and protected long term. And so you can actually have different tiers of the data that you need different things for. And that's really fundamentally what's different here. It's not like keep it all, analyze it all, because rarely is that so beneficial, but also it's really hard to do, right? If you're moving petabytes of data across lines, that's going to be pretty challenging. So I think that's what's different. But there also is this explosion of edge data centers. So, we spend a lot of time with our partner Equinix as a kind of a major data center provider, and they're in all the major metros, but there are also players that are trying to be yet even further to the edge, in cell towers, in micro data centers, in sites that are really, really kind of almost in just regular buildings, right? Where a lot of the data and analytics could be captured and processed. And so what it means is, even though people are consolidating traditional data centers, there's an explosion of more locations where some sort of, infrastructure has to exist, but it has to be small.
All right, so you're really you're revealing a world which is not just these monster data centers of Google or Azure, AWS. Just so the land is dotted with these kind of mini or mid-sized data centers that are part of the overall network, and actually they're not even optional. We need those little mini data centers, just like we need the monster data centers.
Yeah, I mean, it's, we were chatting before the call, this whole pendulum swing, right, between it's distributed, no, it's centralized, back and forth. So we're in a big decentralization moment, right, where more and more things can be processed locally, decision-making can happen. Certainly IoT is a very extreme example of it and is very impactful to certain industries, but your plain old regular, kind of traditional enterprise decision maker is a little less in the IoT world maybe, and more in the trying to have more and more access to real-time data that's happening, in people's phones, at, kind of points of interaction in, local stores, that kind of thing. And it's, I think it's a very exciting time, but what it does is it yet again puts a lot of pressure on how much of that are you going to own and build and manage yourself versus how much can you take advantage of what's out there in the ecosystem from technology providers. The cloud is certainly a huge part of it, but it's not the only part.
And I think the word data is obviously a part of what's driving this in terms of, or is the thing driving this, in that I think about, big data analytics, predictive analytics, and of course, artificial intelligence require these big oceans of data. Like the more data, the better. The more data you can pump into your machine learning system, the better. And so it was like, cloud has grown up, but the need for cloud has grown up. And I don't know if there's a question here. I just think we're sort of drowning in the data, but we're not competitive. If we're not handling our data properly, if we're not gleaning insights from our data, we're not competitive anymore. And so we need big data, which means we need enormous amounts of data. So where do we store it all, and how do we handle it all? That's not a question. I just think it's a problem facing businesses.
Totally. And, unfortunately, like every time the technology gets better, the data explodes faster,
Right.
right?
Right.
We could talk about that, a few companies ago when I was at a company, Netiza, where the fact that there would be a terabyte of data in a data warehouse was like a really, really big deal. A
Right.
terabyte
Whoa, a
of file
terabyte.
is kind of
Whoa.
absurd, right? We used to say,
Yes.
oh, how much data do you have, Mr. Large Enterprise? And they would say, oh, we have a lot. We have about a few hundred gig, I mean,
Right.
wow. But it doesn't matter, right? It's always about the tools having to keep up with the demand and the speed. Also, some of it is just the ability to do things quickly, and traditional approaches often were much more batch, and of course that doesn't work anymore.
So what advice would you give to businesses? They have to deal with cloud storage. They're somewhat flummoxed by it. And what would you say to them if they're overwhelmed and not sure what to do? I mean, what advice might you give them about cloud storage?
A lot of the really thoughtful IT leaders that I get the pleasure of getting to talk to are sort of spending time with their teams, and then also with people they trust in the industry, including startups like ClearSky, but also more sort of established people who have helped them think through things, to identify the different workloads and the projects where they want to really dig in on certain types of things. And the big question of what do they own versus what do they outsource is a big question to them. They also, I think, have started to have very interesting conversations with finance about the way finance will allow them to bill and track and bill back and all these kinds of things. And that is, you can't just do that overnight, but those conversations have now been going on for many years. First, it was security and getting the security people to just even consider these much more open and distributed models. Then it might moved into more of a cost analysis, tracking, modeling. So a lot of it becomes very operational in terms of understanding what the utilization and sort of efficiency is of these different types of models. Because in the end, IT is responsible for that, right? It's not just about, hey, let's try a bunch of cool new technology. So I think that's what's going on. It's a very methodical approach to things versus, I think a few years ago, it was much more like throw the spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. They also have a lot of work to do with their teams. Like a lot of the work is internal, which is how do you get your team comfortable? Like I cannot tell you without naming names how many conversations we've been in where people in the room are fighting with each other about what they're willing to adopt and how they feel. And some of it's emotional and it's religious and it's all the usual issues.
Of course.
And if you ignore that, you are going to be in trouble because no matter what you've done, someone will tell you why what they were doing before was better. So.
Well, you mentioned the finance piece. I'm assuming it's not as simple as CapEx versus OpEx. But can we drill down a bit? What do you mean when you talk about the finance piece?
Well, CapEx versus OpEx is still alive and well as a question in a lot of organizations. And we have customers who are live and in production with us, paying us per gig, per month, pay as you go. But all flavors of models are possible. Pay it all up front, pay it quarterly, pay it monthly, but a lot of it has to do with how their financial organization can take advantage of things. Mm-hmm. So even though they would like to have a much more tight connection between actual usage and what they're paying, they're used to buying things in huge bulk, getting enormous discounts, and then just saying that's going to be 3 to 5 years worth of my buy. Mm-hmm. And so they're kind of in a process of working through with each other, how can that be done? So that's still an issue that we see all the time. And the more efficient you are, the more you know how to consume these types of on-demand services, it's better for the organization. You can always prepay, right? That's always an option. It's the other way that's the issue. Right. So that's one thing. And then the other thing we see a lot of is that the role of IT is so much in a consultative role now with the business units that they're being able to do bill back or charge back to their business units, and having the business units understand the cost of what is involved with what they're asking for so that they can make better decisions about, let's prioritize these types of instances for this type of a workload. Here, we really don't need that much data protection or redundancy because it's scratch stuff that's going away, or, really, really high performance is critical for this thing, but not for this thing. And if you can't put dollars around it, it's very hard to have a factual conversation because it's always like, I need everything. That's what they typically get.
Right. Well, let's look to the future for a second. If we think about what cloud storage is going to be like in the year 2023 or even 2025, it's a long way to look out, I know, in technology, but what is it going to look like? Or in terms of like, how can companies prepare for that now? And I'm hoping your answer is going to be, well, it's confusing now, but it's going to be all simple then. Flip a switch. We'll have artificial intelligence. no more headaches by the year, say 2024. Is my prediction accurate, or perhaps too rosy? I don't know.
Well, we seem to be in a very long cycle right now. You know, I mean, we were talking about like it's 10 years of cloud, and now we've got all this edge stuff going on, and we're kind of just in the emerging few years of that taking off. So I can't say that in the next 5 years it's going to have become simpler, because that probably is a little optimistic. But what I can say is I am sure that we will see another swing of companies getting much more standardized on a few different key types of products and vendors for the different types of things they're doing. They'll start to be more consensus. And I see it by industry vertical, you know, financial services versus healthcare versus, you know, law firms that we service, where they have certain things that they do for different types of work that have to get done, and they all talk to each other. And that starts to emerge as kind of like, that's the right way to do it. So I think we'll have more of that. Even, I don't know what to call it, playbooks, best practices, you know, pick your favorite word, but what it will mean is that there'll be a lot less complexity in terms of the numbers of things that are all being tried at the same time. So at least that hopefully will be a little bit easier.
So you actually see an era of greater standardization and sort of an accepted best practices coming in sometime in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I think, you know, like the getting more professionals getting trained, certified, and more comfortable with what the different technologies can do really versus they all can do everything, you know, according to the marketing, is where this all shakes out. And then it becomes like, hey, you know, we did really use some of this stuff and it worked great. And here are the ways in which it's the most productive. And if you want to do that in this particular type of a model for, you know, hey, I've got healthcare, you know, analytics that have to do with how are my outcomes performing, and I need research teams that collaborate, and I've got, you know, here's a description of a set of things I have to accomplish. There starts to become an emerging consensus of how the best way is to do that. And it's great. You know, it's great for the people that we work with. They get up on stage, they talk about things, they talk about, hey, these technology, they almost don't care about the technology, right? It's more about the way they've approached the problem, and then the technology kind of slots into it.
Well, I look forward to that future. Ellen, thank you very much for sharing your expertise today. I think I learned something. Thank you.
Pleasure. Nice to talk to you.